The night was heavy with fear. Torches burned high, throwing shadows across the open ground where the execution was about to take place. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, sweat, and hatred. Hundreds of voices rose in anger, demanding only one thing: the death of the prisoner, who was dragged in chains across the dirt. His feet were bare, bleeding from the long walk, but his eyes were still sharp, glowing faintly in the firelight, like those of a wild beast. He was known only as the Predator, a creature half human and half alien, feared by both sides, cursed as a monster who killed without mercy. Children hid behind their mothers as he passed, and soldiers tightened their grip on weapons, though his arms were chained and broken from beatings. He stood taller than most men, his body covered in scars that told of many battles. The people spat at him, shouting insults, throwing stones, but he did not flinch. His mouth curled into something between a grin and a snarl, as if their hatred was nothing new to him. The guards pushed him down to his knees in the center of the square. The execution stone lay before him, its surface dark with the stains of countless deaths. An executioner raised a heavy blade above his head, waiting for the order to strike. The crowd shouted louder, some demanding a slow death, some wanting him burned, but all wanted him gone. To them, he was not a man. He was a nightmare that had walked too long in daylight. The Predator lifted his head and scanned the faces of the mob. There was no fear in his eyes, only a cold fire that made even the boldest men step back. His chains rattled as he pulled against them, testing their strength. The guards trembled, though they outnumbered him. They knew the stories. This creature had torn apart armed squads with his bare hands, moved through shadows like a ghost, and left only bodies in his path. Yet tonight, they believed, his terror would end. He would be silenced once and for all. The crowd cheered the thought, their voices rising like a storm. But in the middle of that storm, one person was silent. From the raised platform at the edge of the square, a woman stood watching. She wore the armor of a commander, silver plates that gleamed under the torchlight, and her face carried no fear. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, studying the prisoner not as a beast, but as something else. While the crowd saw a monster, she saw something dangerous, yes, but also something useful. She had seen warriors all her life, but never one with this kind of presence. He did not beg, he did not cry, he did not look broken. Even with death hanging over him, he looked alive, stronger than all the men who held him down. The executioner raised his blade higher, the torchlight glinting off the steel. The crowd screamed for blood. Some shouted for the order to be given. Others laughed, already celebrating his death. And then a voice cut through the chaos, calm, clear, and commanding. "Wait." The word echoed across the square, silencing the mob in a single breath. All eyes turned to the woman on the platform. She walked forward, her steps measured, her eyes locked on the chained Predator. The guards shifted uneasily, unsure whether to continue or obey her. Even the executioner froze, his blade trembling in the air. The Predator tilted his head, curious. He had expected death, but not this. The woman stood before him now, so close she could see the details of his scars, the cold glow in his eyes. Her face was unreadable. The crowd began to murmur, anger growing again, demanding she not interfere. She ignored them. Her gaze stayed fixed on the prisoner. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them standing in the firelight, Predator and Commander. Then, slowly, she spoke. "Kill him, and you waste a weapon. Keep him alive, and he may save us all." Gasps rose from the crowd. "Madness," they whispered. No one wanted this beast alive. But her words had power, enough to silence even the loudest voice. The Predator's lips curled into a slow grin, a dangerous grin that made the guards step back. For the first time in years, he felt something other than rage. Someone had not looked at him as a monster, but as a weapon, a force with purpose. The idea amused him. He pulled against his chains once more, the iron creaking, and his voice, rough and low, slipped through the night air. "So, you would use me?" The crowd roared in protest, but the woman did not blink. Her eyes met his, steady and strong. She had made her choice. Whether the world agreed or not, the execution would not end as planned. The Predator was not going to die that night. Something far more dangerous was about to begin, and in the silence between the crowd's shouts and the crackling of torches, a new story started. The story of a man sentenced to death, and a woman who decided his skills were too deadly to waste. The crowd was restless, their voices sharp with anger after the woman stopped the execution. They could not believe what they had just heard. She had spoken with authority, but her words went against everything they wanted. To them, the predator was not a man but a monster, and monsters deserved only death. Still, no one dared to openly defy her. She was a commander, respected and feared, known for her cold decisions and victories on the battlefield. When she raised her hand, the guards froze. When she ordered the executioner to lower the blade, he obeyed, though his face twisted with disbelief. The predator remained on his knees, his eyes fixed on her, glowing faintly in the torchlight. He could sense something was changing, something he had not expected. He had come to this ground ready to die, but now death had been pushed away. She stepped closer, her armor shining as she looked down at him. The chains rattled when he moved slightly, but he stayed silent, waiting. Then she spoke, her voice calm but carrying across the entire square. "I offer him a choice." The words made the crowd explode in anger. Some shouted curses at her. Others demanded she be punished for protecting the beast. She ignored them. Her eyes never left the prisoner. "Fight for me," she continued, "or die here." The predator tilted his head, his lips curling into a slow, sharp smile. He did not laugh, but the expression was enough to make the guards tighten their grips on his chains. He could have spoken many things in that moment, threats, insults, maybe even silence. But instead, he whispered one question, his voice low but carrying enough weight to silence the noise around him. "Why me?" The woman did not flinch. "Because no one fights like you. You are dangerous, yes. You are hated, yes. But in war, we need danger. In war, fear is a weapon. And you are fear." Her words made the predator's grin fade into something colder. He had been called many things before: monster, murderer, curse, but never had anyone called him a weapon to be used, not in this way. He looked at her carefully, trying to read her, but she was calm, steady, and unreadable. The crowd continued to protest, screaming louder now, demanding her removal. Yet the guards did not move against her. Her rank and reputation protected her, at least for now. The executioner lowered his blade fully, his hand shaking with frustration. The people grew louder, their cries almost deafening, but she raised her voice again. "This is not mercy. Do not think I pity him. I am not saving him. I am testing him. If he fails, his death will be slow, and it will be by my order." The crowd hesitated, some falling silent, others muttering in confusion. They wanted blood, but her words carried the weight of truth. She was not a weak woman rescuing a monster out of kindness. She was a commander making a gamble in front of all. The predator's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, the chains clinking, his voice mocking as he asked, "And if I kill you first?" The question was not shouted, but spoken with calm danger, enough to make the guards raise their weapons instantly. The crowd gasped. Sure, this was his end. But she did not even blink. Her expression remained steady, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of her blade. "Then you will never leave this ground alive," she answered simply. "But if you choose to fight for me, if you give me your skills, then you will live, at least until your usefulness ends." The silence that followed was heavy. The predator studied her with an intensity that made even seasoned soldiers uneasy. He was a creature who had been hunted, hated, and beaten, but not once had he seen anyone look at him with such steady eyes. She did not fear him. She did not beg. She offered him something else: purpose. It was strange, almost insulting, but strangely tempting. Finally, he laughed, the sound dark and rough, echoing through the square. The crowd recoiled at the sound, some covering their ears as if it was the laughter of a demon. He pulled at his chains again, testing them until the iron groaned. His voice came through the laughter, sharp and cutting. "You're bold, Commander, bold enough to use a beast." His smile grew wider, showing his teeth. "Very well. I'll fight, not for you, not for your people. I fight for myself. But if you stand in my way, I'll tear you apart first." Gasps filled the air, but the woman only nodded slowly, as if she had expected such an answer. "Good," she said softly, almost to herself. "A beast that fights for survival fights harder than a man who fights for gold." She turned to the guards. "Release him from the execution chains. Bind him in soldiers' chains. He belongs to me now." The guards hesitated, fear in their eyes, but they obeyed. The heavy chains around his neck and arms were loosened, replaced by reinforced shackles designed for dangerous prisoners of war. The predator stood tall as they fastened the new bonds, his shadow stretching long across the firelit ground. The people shouted in outrage, some throwing more stones, some crying betrayal, but it no longer mattered. The decision had been made. As he stood beside her, the predator looked down at the crowd. His eyes burned with challenge, daring anyone to step forward. None did. For all their hatred, none were brave enough to face him without the safety of chains. The commander raised her hand to silence them once more, her voice sharp and final. You wanted his death tonight. Instead, you will see his power serve our war. His blood will spill for us, not against us. The predator tilted his head, amused, still smiling faintly. For the first time in a long while, he felt the chains of death lift from his shoulders. He was still bound, still trapped, but now there was a path ahead that promised more than just silence in the grave. And though he spoke no words, his eyes told the truth. He was no longer waiting to die. He was waiting to see where this gamble would take him and whether the commander was truly bold enough to control a predator. The next days were filled with silence and tension. The predator was taken from the execution ground to a place where no ordinary soldier was trained. It was an old fortress at the edge of the city, a place used for secret training of dangerous recruits. The guards who escorted him kept their distance, their hands shaking whenever he moved. His presence was enough to make even the strongest warrior uneasy. They had seen men broken by chains, but this one walked as if the iron meant nothing. His steps were heavy, but his head remained high, and his eyes glowed with a wild fire that made them look away quickly. When they arrived, the commander was already waiting. She had chosen this place carefully. No crowd, no voices, no interruptions, only stone walls and open grounds where his skills could be tested. She stood at the center, her arms crossed, watching as the predator was pushed forward by trembling guards. He stopped in front of her, the chains clinking softly, and for a moment there was only silence between them. Then she said simply, "Today we see if you are worth keeping alive." He grinned at her words, showing teeth like a wolf about to hunt. "You already know I'm worth more than these weaklings," he said, his voice low and sharp. The guards tightened their grips on their weapons, but she raised a hand, stopping them. "Words are easy," she replied calmly. "Show me with action." The first test began without warning. Several trained fighters stepped forward, circling him with wooden weapons. They were strong, disciplined soldiers, each ready to strike. The predator tilted his head, amused, as they moved around him like hunters closing in on prey. But when the first man attacked, the roles were reversed in an instant. With a speed that shocked everyone, the predator twisted, caught the weapon, and slammed the soldier into the ground so hard that the dust rose in the air. The other fighters froze for a second, then attacked together, but he was like a storm. His chains limited him, yet he used them as weapons, wrapping one around a soldier's arm and yanking him down, spinning to strike another with a kick that sent him flying. Within moments, all the soldiers were lying on the ground, groaning in pain. The predator stood in the middle, chest rising with excitement, his eyes shining brighter than before. He turned to the commander with a mocking smile. "Is this your test? Children with sticks?" The guards looked ready to strike him down for the insult, but the commander only nodded slightly. She was not surprised. She had expected this outcome. Still, she was not finished. "Strength alone is not enough," she said. She ordered the soldiers to rise again. "You fight not to kill this time, but to obey. I give the command. You follow." This time, the predator's grin faded slightly. He did not like being ordered. His whole life had been about fighting for himself, surviving by his own rules. Yet something in her steady eyes made him hesitate. The soldiers attacked again, and this time he restrained himself. Instead of killing blows, he struck only to disarm, to throw down, to disable. His movements were slower, less natural, and his frustration showed. He was a predator forced to act like a trained hound, and it burned inside him. But each time he looked at her, she gave him the same calm stare, as if daring him to fail. The battle ended again with the soldiers defeated, but this time alive. The predator was breathing hard, his jaw tight with anger. He looked at her sharply. "I am no dog to obey tricks," he growled. She stepped closer, her voice quiet but firm. "No, you are a weapon, and a weapon without control is useless. Learn to control yourself, or I will let them cut you down where you stand." For the first time, he did not smile. He hated her words, but deep inside, he understood them. He had always fought for survival, but survival now depended on more than raw power. If he wanted to live, he had to bend, even if just a little. His silence was his answer. She saw it, and she turned away, satisfied for the moment. The days that followed were brutal. She tested him in every way she could. He was made to fight against groups larger and stronger. He was forced to carry weights under scorching sun until his body screamed. He was thrown into mazes filled with traps, ordered to escape without using pure rage but strategy. Every day he cursed under his breath. Every day he looked ready to break his chains and kill everyone around him. Yet every day he returned, alive, stronger, and sharper. Slowly, something began to change. The soldiers who once mocked him began to watch him with respect. They saw the way he fought, the way he endured punishment that would have broken 10 men. They whispered about him, calling him beast, monster, but also warrior. And though they still feared him, some began to admire his will. The commander observed him always, her eyes never missing a detail. She saw his temper, his hunger for freedom, but also the spark of discipline that was slowly growing. Sometimes she spoke to him after training, short words, never soft, but never cruel. "You fight like chaos," she said one evening, "but chaos can be shaped into war." He listened without reply, but those words stayed with him. For the first time in years, someone was not trying to kill him or run from him. She was trying to shape him, use him, perhaps even trust him in her own way. It was strange, and he did not fully understand why he allowed it. But as the nights passed, chained inside the fortress, he realized one truth. He was no longer waiting to die. He was being prepared for something larger, something dangerous. And though he still hated the chains, a small part of him was curious to see where this path would lead. Because for the first time, the predator was not fighting alone. He was being turned into something new. And even he did not know what kind of monster or warrior he would become. The night was quiet when she entered the fortress chamber where the predator was chained. A single torch burned on the wall, throwing long shadows across his scarred body. He was sitting against the stone, his arms resting loosely on his knees, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He looked like a beast waiting for the next fight, but there was something else in his face too. Something deeper, hidden behind the rough mask. She had watched him for weeks, testing his strength, shaping his fury, but she still did not know who he truly was. Tonight, she wanted answers. She stood before him, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Why did you become this? Why did they call you Predator?" For a moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and sharp, until his lips curled in a bitter smile. "Because it was easier than what I really was." His voice was low, almost a growl, but not filled with anger this time. He leaned back, letting the chains clink softly. "You want the truth, Commander? The truth is uglier than the lies." Her eyes stayed steady. She did not move, did not press him, only waited. Slowly, he began to speak. "I was not born a monster. I was born among people who called themselves my family, my clan. I fought for them, bled for them, killed for them when war came to our lands. I believed in them. I believed I was protecting my people." His voice grew harsher, a shadow crossing his face. "But when the time came, when the enemy offered gold and power, they sold me like an animal to the very men I had killed for them. My own blood, my own kin, chained me, handed me over, and called me cursed." The commander's eyes narrowed slightly. She understood betrayal well, but hearing it in his voice was different. It was not just betrayal. It was destruction. He laughed then, a hollow sound that held no joy. "That day, I died. Not my body, but everything else. Loyalty, trust, love, gone. What remained was the thing you see now. They called me Predator because I stopped fighting for them and started fighting only for myself. I became the monster they wanted me to be. Easier to kill, easier to hate." For the first time, she saw something break through his hard mask. His eyes, still glowing, flickered with pain, old wounds carved deeper than any scar on his body. He had carried this past like a chain heavier than the iron on his arms. She did not look away. "Do you still hate them?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened. "Hate? Hate is too small. I feel nothing for them. They are already dead to me. But the memory remains. Every night, every time I close my eyes, I see their faces as they turned from me. That is why I fight. Not for honor, not for glory, not even for survival. I fight because I know what the world is. Betrayal is the only truth. Power is the only law. Her heart tightened at his words, but her face remained calm. And yet, you saved me once, she said. On the battlefield, when you could have walked away, you chose to fight at my side. Why? He looked at her, his grin sharp but hollow. Because if you die, my chains end. Because if you live, I live longer. Do not mistake it for kindness, Commander. But even as he spoke, his voice wavered, as if he was not fully certain himself. She stepped closer, her gaze locked with his. Maybe, or maybe you are more than the monster you pretend to be. Maybe you are what they feared most, a man they could not control. His eyes darkened at her words. Something inside him stirred, something he had buried under years of rage. He wanted to laugh, to dismiss her, but he could not. Deep inside, a small part of him still remembered what it was to fight for someone else, to protect, to belong. It frightened him more than any chain. He leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. Careful, Commander. Do not look for a man where only a beast remains. But she did not back away. Her voice was steady, almost quiet. Beast or man, you are mine now, and if you truly are nothing but rage, then prove it in the war to come. Show me that your past cannot chain you anymore. The predator stared at her for a long time, his chest rising and falling with a slow, heavy breath. At last, he looked away, his grin returning, but softer this time. You play a dangerous game, Commander. You pull chains you don't understand. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. For the first time, it was not sharp or mocking, but heavy with something closer to pain. Do not betray me, he said quietly. If you do, I will not survive it again. Her steps paused for a moment, but she did not turn back. She left him there, chained in the dark, but his words echoed in her mind long after. She had seen his strength, his fury, his skills, but now she had seen the truth behind them. He was not born a monster. He was made into one, shaped by betrayal. And deep inside, the man he once was still lived, wounded and dangerous. In the silence of the fortress, the predator sat alone, his eyes glowing in the dark. For years, he had carried only hate, only rage. But now, after speaking the truth, something had shifted. He did not trust her. He did not trust anyone, but a part of him wondered if this commander was different. He hated the thought, hated the weakness of even considering it, yet he could not push it away. For the first time in a long while, the predator felt something he thought had died with his clan. Hope. Twisted, small, fragile, but there. And that hope, as dangerous as it was, scared him more than any enemy ever could. The fortress was filled with whispers that night. Soldiers spoke in low voices, passing rumors like fire spreading through dry grass. Some said the commander had lost her mind. Others said she was plotting treason. All of them pointed to one thing: the predator. The people had not forgotten the execution ground, and neither had the council. They had allowed her to keep him alive, but patience was running out. The high commanders believed she was playing with danger, and danger could not be trusted. Behind closed doors, they made their plan. They would remove her and destroy the predator in one strike. The commander felt the shift in the air before she heard the first words. She noticed how soldiers she trusted avoided her eyes. She saw the way her orders were carried out slower, how whispers stopped when she entered the room. She was no fool. She knew betrayal when she saw it. Still, she kept her face calm, her voice steady. Only at night, when she passed the chamber where the predator was chained, did her mask slip. She would glance at him, wondering if she had gambled too much. The predator, chained but watchful, noticed it too. His glowing eyes followed her every move. He could smell fear like a wolf smells blood, and he smelled it everywhere now. One evening, when she stood by his door longer than usual, he spoke. "They are coming for you." His voice was quiet but certain. She looked at him sharply. "And how do you know that?" His grin returned, sharp and dangerous. "Because I know betrayal. I can hear it in the silence. I can taste it in the air. You gave me chains instead of death, Commander. That makes you an enemy to your own kind." Her lips pressed into a hard line. She did not answer him, but inside, she knew he was right. The attack came sooner than expected. In the middle of the night, the sound of steel clashing and boots pounding filled the fortress. Torches burned in the halls as soldiers stormed in, not to fight an enemy, but to turn against their own. The commander rushed from her chamber, blade in hand, but she was outnumbered. Dozens surrounded her, their faces twisted with anger and fear. One of the high commanders stepped forward, his voice loud and cruel. "You brought shame on us. You kept alive a monster. Tonight, both you and your beast die." The predator heard it all from his chamber. The sound of fighting, the commander's voice shouting orders, the clash of weapons. His chains rattled as he rose to his feet, pulling hard against the iron until the stone wall cracked. His laugh echoed through the room, wild and mocking. "So, this is the test, Commander? Not mine. Yours." Outside, the commander fought fiercely, her blade flashing, cutting down soldier after soldier. But no matter how strong she was, numbers overwhelmed her. A spear grazed her arm, blood running down her sleeve. Another soldier slammed her back against the wall, his sword ready to pierce her chest. In that moment, a roar shattered the air. The doors of the chamber burst open, iron chains dragging like thunder. The predator stormed out, eyes blazing, his shackles torn and broken from the wall. The soldiers froze, their courage melting as they saw the monster they had feared for years now free. He moved like a storm, the broken chains in his hands turning into deadly whips. With one swing, he shattered bones. With another, he pulled a soldier close and slammed him into the ground. Blood stained the floor as men screamed and ran. The commander, panting, her blade trembling in her hand, looked at him in shock. He had chosen. He could have killed her, could have let her fall, but instead, he fought by her side. The predator's grin was savage as he cut down another man. "I told you, Commander, betrayal is the only truth, and tonight, they betrayed you. That makes us the same." Together, they tore through the attackers. She moved with precision, striking quickly, while he moved with fury, destroying everything in his path. The soldiers who had come to end them fell one after another, their screams swallowed by the clash of steel and the roar of the beast they had tried to kill. When the last man fell, silence returned to the fortress. The air was heavy with smoke and blood. The commander stood, her chest heaving, her armor dented, but alive. The predator stood beside her, his chains broken, his body covered in cuts, but his eyes burning brighter than ever. He turned to her, his grin fading into something colder. "Now you see, Commander, they never wanted me dead alone. They wanted you too. You tied your fate to mine, and now there is no turning back." She looked at him, her face unreadable. For the first time, she saw clearly what keeping him alive had cost her. The council would never forgive her. Her people would never trust her again. She had made her choice, and tonight proved it. He was no longer just her weapon. He was her shadow, her curse, and perhaps her only ally. The predator stepped closer, lowering his voice. "So tell me, Commander, will you still call me your soldier? Or will you admit the truth? You and I are bound, not by chains, but by survival?" She met his burning eyes without flinching. "You are still mine," she whispered, though her heart knew the truth. He was no longer chained by her. He had become something greater, something terrifying. And now they were tied together, not as master and beast, but as two betrayed souls forced to fight against a world that wanted them both dead. The fortress, once a place of training, had become a graveyard of men who thought they could control fate. The predator stood among the bodies, breathing hard, his grin slowly returning. For the first time, the commander understood what she had created. Not a weapon, not a monster, but a force no one could stop. And as dawn broke over the blood-stained ground, she realized one thing. There was no escape from him now, and no escape from the war that was coming. The fortress was filled with whispers that night. Soldiers spoke in low voices, passing rumors like fire spreading through dry grass. Some said the commander had lost her mind. Others said she was plotting treason. All of them pointed to one thing: the predator. The people had not forgotten the execution ground, and neither had the council. They had allowed her to keep him alive, but patience was running out. The high commanders believed she was playing with danger, and danger could not be trusted. Behind closed doors, they made their plan. They would remove her and destroy the predator in one strike. The commander felt the shift in the air before she heard the first words. She noticed how soldiers she trusted avoided her eyes. She saw the way her orders were carried out slower, how whispers stopped when she entered the room. She was no fool. She knew betrayal when she saw it. Still, she kept her face calm, her voice steady. Only at night, when she passed the chamber where the predator was chained, did her mask slip. She would glance at him, wondering if she had gambled too much. The predator, chained but watchful, noticed it too. His glowing eyes followed her every move. He could smell fear like a wolf smells blood, and he smelled it everywhere now. One evening, when she stood by his door longer than usual, he spoke. "They are coming for you." His voice was quiet but certain. She looked at him sharply. "And how do you know that?" His grin returned, sharp and dangerous. "Because I know betrayal. I can hear it in the silence. I can taste it in the air. You gave me chains instead of death, Commander. That makes you an enemy to your own kind." Her lips pressed into a hard line. She did not answer him, but inside, she knew he was right. The attack came sooner than expected. In the middle of the night, the sound of steel clashing and boots pounding filled the fortress. Torches burned in the halls as soldiers stormed in, not to fight an enemy, but to turn against their own. The commander rushed from her chamber, blade in hand, but she was outnumbered. Dozens surrounded her, their faces twisted with anger and fear. One of the high commanders stepped forward, his voice loud and cruel. "You brought shame on us. You kept alive a monster. Tonight, both you and your beast die." The predator heard it all from his chamber. The sound of fighting, the commander's voice shouting orders, the clash of weapons. His chains rattled as he rose to his feet, pulling hard against the iron until the stone wall cracked. His laugh echoed through the room, wild and mocking. "So this is the test, Commander? Not mine, yours." Outside, the commander fought fiercely, her blade flashing, cutting down soldier after soldier. But no matter how strong she was, numbers overwhelmed her. A spear grazed her arm, blood running down her sleeve. Another soldier slammed her back against the wall, his sword ready to pierce her chest. In that moment, a roar shattered the air. The doors of the chamber burst open, iron chains dragging like thunder. The predator stormed out, eyes blazing, his shackles torn and broken from the wall. The soldiers froze, their courage melting as they saw the monster they had feared for years now free. He moved like a storm, the broken chains in his hands turning into deadly whips. With one swing, he shattered bones. With another, he pulled a soldier close and slammed him into the ground. Blood stained the floor as men screamed and ran. The commander, panting, her blade trembling in her hand, looked at him in shock. He had chosen. He could have killed her, could have let her fall, but instead he fought by her side. The predator's grin was savage as he cut down another man. "I told you, Commander, betrayal is the only truth, and tonight, they betrayed you. That makes us the same." Together, they tore through the attackers. She moved with precision, striking quickly, while he moved with fury, destroying everything in his path. The soldiers who had come to end them fell one after another, their screams swallowed by the clash of steel and the roar of the beast they had tried to kill. When the last man fell, silence returned to the fortress. The air was heavy with smoke and blood. The commander stood, her chest heaving, her armor dented but alive. The predator stood beside her, his chains broken, his body covered in cuts, but his eyes burning brighter than ever. He turned to her, his grin fading into something colder. "Now you see, Commander, they never wanted me dead alone. They wanted you too. You tied your fate to mine, and now there is no turning back." She looked at him, her face unreadable. For the first time, she saw clearly what keeping him alive had cost her. The council would never forgive her. Her people would never trust her again. She had made her choice, and tonight proved it. He was no longer just her weapon. He was her shadow, her curse, and perhaps her only ally. The predator stepped closer, lowering his voice. "So tell me, Commander, will you still call me your soldier? Or will you admit the truth? You and I are bound, not by chains, but by survival." She met his burning eyes without flinching. "You are still mine," she whispered, though her heart knew the truth. He was no longer chained by her. He had become something greater, something terrifying. And now they were tied together, not as master and beast, but as two betrayed souls, forced to fight against a world that wanted them both dead. The fortress, once a place of training, had become a graveyard of men who thought they could control fate. The predator stood among the bodies, breathing hard, his grin slowly returning. For the first time, the commander understood what she had created. Not a weapon, not a monster, but a force no one could stop. And as dawn broke over the blood-stained ground, she realized one thing. There was no escape from him now, and no escape from the war that was coming. The battlefield stretched as far as the eye could see, broken earth littered with smoke, fire, and the cries of the dying. Armies clashed in waves, shields breaking, swords rising and falling, the ground turning red under countless feet. At the center of it all, the predator stood, no longer a chained prisoner, but a warrior unleashed. His eyes glowed with that same dangerous fire, his body marked with scars and fresh wounds. Yet he did not slow. Every movement was brutal, precise, like death given form. The soldiers who once cursed his name now followed in his shadow, their fear replaced with awe as they saw him tear through the enemy like a storm no wall could stop. The commander fought beside him, her blade flashing as she struck down foes who dared to come close. She had seen him in training, seen him in betrayal, but nothing compared to this. Here, in the heart of war, the predator was in his element. His chains had been broken, but his deadly skills were sharpened into something greater, something unstoppable. Together they moved like two sides of the same blade, cutting through the chaos with a rhythm that no enemy could match. The enemy had not come with a small force. They brought beasts of war, creatures taller than walls, armored and armed to crush anything in their path. Soldiers screamed as one of the beasts charged forward, its roar shaking the earth. Fear spread quickly, men dropping their weapons, ready to run. But before panic could consume them, the predator leapt. His body crashed against the beast, his hands clawing into its thick hide. He climbed like a wild animal, ignoring the strikes, ignoring the blood that poured down his arm. With one final roar, he drove his blade deep into the creature's neck, twisting until it collapsed with a thunderous crash. The army froze, both friend and foe watching in disbelief. The monster that had led the enemy now lay dead, slain not by 100 spears, but by the one man they had once sentenced to death. A roar erupted from the soldiers who fought beside him, their spirits rising higher than ever before. Where fear had lived, hope now burned bright. The commander raised her sword and shouted, "Forward!" and the army surged like a wave, stronger than before, driven by the sight of the predator standing on the fallen beast with blood dripping from his blade. But the battle was not done. The enemy commanders saw the shift and grew desperate. They ordered archers to target the predator, to kill the weapon that turned the tide. Arrows rained down like a storm of black feathers, cutting through men and shields alike. The predator stood exposed, his body already bleeding. But before the arrows could claim him, the commander threw herself forward, raising her shield. The sound of arrows striking iron filled the air as she shielded his back. He turned sharply, eyes burning with something more than rage. For the first time, there was no grin, no mocking words, only a spark of something human. He tore through the archers, not for survival this time, but for her. His movements became wild, faster, more violent, until the ground was littered with broken bows and lifeless bodies. When it was done, he stood beside her, chest heaving, blood dripping from dozens of wounds. She looked at him, breathing hard, and said only, "You are more than a beast." He gave no answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. The war raged for hours. Every time the enemy pushed, the predator broke them. Every time hope faded, he brought it back with blood and fire. He was not fighting for glory, not for honor, not even for himself anymore. He was fighting for the commander, for the army that had once hated him, and for a strange truth he had only just begun to understand, that he was no longer alone. When the sun finally rose, the battlefield was silent. Smoke rose from the earth, bodies lay in the dirt, but the enemy was gone, broken and scattered. The soldiers stood victorious, their faces stunned as they looked at the man they once cursed. Whispers spread through the crowd, whispers that grew into chants. Predator, they called him still, but not with hate anymore. Now it was spoken with respect, even pride. He had become their weapon, their savior, their protector. The commander stood at his side, her armor cracked, her blade stained, but her head high. She looked at him, her voice steady despite exhaustion. "They will never forget this day. They will never forget you." He stared back, his eyes glowing in the rising sun. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, finally, his lips curled into a faint smile, not sharp or mocking, but real. "They called me Predator," he said quietly, "but today, I was something more." The soldiers around them raised their weapons in salute, their cheers shaking the ground. He did not bow. did not thank them, but deep inside, he felt something he had not felt since his betrayal: belonging. It was fragile, dangerous, but real. As the army began to march back, the commander walked beside him. She knew the council would still see him as a threat. She knew danger still followed them, but she also knew the truth. He had saved them all, not because of chains, not because of orders, but because he chose to. The predator looked out across the field one last time, the sun glinting off the broken weapons and fallen banners. He had been sentenced to death, cursed as a monster, abandoned as a traitor. Yet here he stood, alive, feared, and respected. Not a beast, not a prisoner, but a protector. And as he walked beside the commander, the chant of the soldiers followed him, echoing across the ruined battlefield. They had once demanded his death, but now they carried his name with pride. For the first time, the predator was not alone. For the first time, his deadly skills were not just for survival, they were for something greater. He had been born in betrayal, shaped by rage, but today he had found a purpose. And though the world would still fear him, one truth could not be denied. The predator was no longer just a nightmare. He was their salvation.